Hello and welcome to Channels and Nextflow podcast. My name is Chris and I'm a developer advocate for Secura Labs, and today I'm joining you from Germany.
Hello everyone, I'm Marcel. I'm a developer advocate at Secura and I'm joining you today from Brazil.
Hi, I'm Rob Syme. I'm a bioinformatics engineer at Secura Labs, joining today from Montreal in Canada.
Today we're talking about a very, it's a topic that we're all really passionate about and something that we've all been involved in quite heavily with through Secura and the Nextflow community, and that topic is training and education. So training is obviously really important with Nextflow. You have to learn a new language and you need to be able to learn how to write and use Nextflow as a part of your sort of daily lives. As a part of that, of course, we have a lot of training material that has been available and developed by Secura and Nextflow. And what we're going to do now is sort of talk through sort of a little bit about the training that we have available, the history of this training, and potentially where we're going to be taking this in the future. So what I thought we'd do to start things off is actually talk about how we all first learned Nextflow and how we sort of entered, how we engage with the Nextflow training material in different ways and how we took that upon ourselves at different points in our sort of Nextflow journey. For me, it was actually viewing the Secura training material, which was hosted by Secura at the time, and viewing some of the training videos that were on YouTube of Evan teaching the DSL1 version of Nextflow.
Yeah, for me it was pretty similar. I was just like scrapping the whole internet about like for everything I could find. There was a carpentries development version training on Nextflow. There was a DSL1 video that Evan recorded on the Secura website. It was all this learning materials and videos. I was like reading everything. The Slack was so useful. Lots of people helping. It was such a great support for me at the beginning. So it was mostly these things, the Nextflow blog posts, the Secura blog posts. Very nice, very, very, very nice.
I learned a lot about Nextflow before all of the training materials were available. I learned Nextflow largely from the documentation and from pinging Paolo directly on Gitter. Back when Nextflow used Gitter. And I was on entirely the wrong side of the world. At the time, I was living in Perth in Western Australia doing my PhD. And I would ping Paolo in my time zone. So it's sort of 10 a.m. Perth time, which meant that Paolo was responding to me almost immediately at 10, 11, 12 p.m. Barcelona time. So I learned a lot directly from Paolo and by reading the documentation, which is not the way I'd recommend it today. And I'm so glad that Secura and the developer advocates here, Chris and Marcel and Phil, have done a great job of filling out the documentation and the training that people have a different path to Nextflow.
So I think taking a step back and looking at where this training material originally came from. So originally it was Secura Labs and Evan and Paolo who sort of started working and developing this training material. And as I mentioned earlier, all of this was developed around DSL1. And what would happen is Paolo and Evan would sort of charge around the world, and especially around Europe, first of all answering Rob's questions, but also sort of teaching others at different institutes about Nextflow. And of course, over time, the training material improved, and it was always been available as a part of the Secura website, hosted on, I think it was secura.training.io. Maybe about a year ago, I think it started transition to actually DSL2. So when Nextflow transitioned from DSL into DSL2, of course, all the training material had to be updated as well. And I think it was around the time I actually joined Secura, which is a little over a year ago now, is that all of this training material started to transition. That was one of my first jobs, actually, was to go through the Secura material and actually try and find all the pieces of DSL2 and pull them out and make sure that, all the pieces of DSL1 and pull them out and make sure that it was still applicable to DSL2. Of course, this is a huge effort and it's still being developed, and occasionally we sort of scroll back and find things that we can do better, and then we start to make those improvements as well. But there's a really huge effort to sort of transition this material. At the same time, I think there are lots of other websites and workshops and training material that do exist. Marcel's already mentioned the software carpentry training material, but I think there's probably at least a dozen or so different workshops and sets of training material that are online. thinking about how the training material has also progressed over time, the material was initially hosted by Sakura, and it was all in a Sakura GitHub account. And of course, you could try and make pull requests against that, but it wasn't as easy. Now it's actually hosted by Nextflow, and it really belongs to the community. And I think this is a really important transition that happened maybe 3 to 6 months ago. Marcel might correct me.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
But that material is now completely available and hosted, and anyone who is a part of the community can try and sort of improve that and make pull requests against the GitHub repository for this. And I think those community contributions are really welcome. So, of course, we sort of see all the training material one way, and we have our own biases and our own sort of way of describing things. But if they don't make sense, I think it's a really great opportunity for new members of the community to sort of, call us out and sort of say, hey, look, this doesn't make sense. Can you add another example? Can you explain this better? And that's very welcomed. I think we can all appreciate that, we know things and we've been around a while. I mean, Rob's been here since before the training material even existed. So the way we describe things and might want to sort of communicate them doesn't fit everyone. So this is probably a call to action for anyone listening and anyone who is in the community and thinks that they can improve the training material to please reach out and tell us what we need to do better. But that's really the history of where the trainings sort of come from. But there's also a lot of training events that have been started to happen in the sort of last 6 to 12 months as well. And I think, Marcel, you're going to tell us about that.
Yeah. I just wanted to add like a few interesting stories about all these contributions, right? So I think you joined, I think it was May that you joined, right? Something like this. Yeah, and right after that, I signed with Sakura, but I would only start in July. And then I had this crazy idea of like, I'm almost done with my PhD, have some spare time. I'm going to pretend I'm not going to work for Sakura, and I'm going to try to write some documentation, to do some contribution before I have my credentials. Because, once you join Sakura, you have contact with everyone, you have your credentials much easier. So I wanted to play a bit as if I was just a random volunteer. And that's what I did. Like you were working with the documentation, the training material, I was like playing a bit. And even Rob, like I think you have like a commit 8 years ago, right? Correcting a typo or something. It's like Chris said, it's a perfect opportunity to start to contribute back. Like you're not an expert on software development or something like this. You can fix a typo. You can rewrite something in a way that you think it's easier for you to read. It's like we've been working with this for a long time. Some things are obvious. We look at it, we think the explanation is clear. Sometimes it isn't. And if you're a beginner, you're the perfect person to do this type of contribution, which was my case. I was just learning about Nextflow. So it was easy for me to say, this for a beginner, we should do better in this way. So this was a great opportunity to start contributing. And all these community events are amazing. So basically what we did was this huge work by Chris, like really like reviewing the whole material. I still remember like, I don't know if it's 100 comments, but it was such a huge work, making everything up to date with DSL2, everything great. Then we were able to start working on the training materials, right? For the DSL2 version of on the recordings and the trainings for this content. And what we have today is this biannual fundamentals community training. So twice a year, we have this event where people register, and we have had a huge amount of people participating, thousands of people registering. I think it was 800, then 900 at the other edition. So twice a year, we get online with people. They watch the recordings or live teachings about the training material that we have worked on. They can go to Slack and ask questions live. We have lots of people from the community, from Sakura, from the NF Core community, who are there to answer your questions. It's such an amazing vibe. Even if it's just the recording, by having people live to help you and answer your questions, it's amazing. So the lectures are there. The videos are always on YouTube. And like Chris also mentioned that we have in many different websites, we have the training materials, right? So I think on Embo, they have a module for learning Nextflow, which is pretty close to the version Sakura had. So I think that by having like on the Sakura domain, the training there, some people thought of just duplicating it and making their improvements instead of trying to contribute back. Because now we have this community version, instead of making a copy and doing your changes, you can just contribute your changes to the community version, which is much better. And you don't get outdated, as it's the case in many places now that host these training materials. They're outdated because we keep updating, they don't sync, and then this happens. Thinking of that, these videos and the material, they are always on YouTube. They're always available. We had this trainings in different time zones, which was a great idea at the beginning, because some people, they wanted to participate live, but they couldn't because of time zone. It was maybe night there or in the middle of working hours. So we had this edition of the training of the community training being in different time zones. We had one for Americas, one for Europe, Africa, and Middle East, and one for Asian Pacific. In the latest edition of this community training, we went ahead. We went one step ahead, and we did in different languages. So it was a huge amount of work, but it paid off. It was so nice. We had a version of the training in English, like the full training, a longer version than what we had before. The full version in English and Spanish, in Portuguese, in French, and in Hindi. And all these versions, they're online on YouTube for you to watch on your pace whenever you want. This was great. I mean, having these different time zones and languages allowed us to reach much further than we could think of at the beginning. People from different areas. I mean, it was great. So, Chris, you want to mention a few things about Commune?
I mean, I was just going to add to that as well, that because all the videos are still available on YouTube, you can review this material and go back and look at these videos, of course, at any time. So if you are new to the community and want to learn more about Nextflow, these videos are there. At least in English, there are a handful of different versions now which are there. And if English isn't your first language and you want to learn in a different language, those are all there as well. Also, on the topic of the sort of the Slack channels, if you do want to ask questions about the training material, there are the NF Core training channels, as well as all the different channels on the Nextflow Slack as well. And you can and are very welcome to ask questions about the training material there, and someone will be sure to jump in and give you a hand with that as well.
I'd just like to add, your perspective as a learner is the most invaluable thing your perspective as a learner is an extraordinarily valuable thing to us, because Chris, Marcel, and I have all since long forgotten what it's like to learn Nextflow for the first time. Like, we'll try as we might to try and remember what that was like. So it's your contributions, either via pull requests or even just questions to the Slack channel, are extraordinarily valuable for us to help craft and improve the training for future generations of Nextflow authors.
Yeah, absolutely. I must admit as well that sometimes you get these questions on Slack or through different, GitHub or whatever else, and you think, wow, I don't know the answer to that. So it's a really great way for us to sort of reflect on how we're presenting this content as well, and if there are sort of gaps in, first of all, our knowledge, but also in the training material itself. So yeah, I completely agree with Rob on that topic as well. So for a long time, we've been sort of talking about, so far we've been talking about the material that is available, and sort of how we've been doing these initiatives to try and make it more accessible to those, first of all, sort of not just in the European time zones or the American time zones, but also who sort of have a different first language or would rather learn in a different language. But we do have plans to make sure that this content is, first of all, always improving and making it more accessible to more people and make it more targeted towards what people are interested in. So what's been happening quietly in the background for a while now is we've started to review this training material and look for gaps and ways that we can improve it. And like Rob said, is that we do reflect heavily on not just the questions that we receive through Slack and other platforms, but also the feedback we get from training material, sort of saying, this is too hard, or this isn't explained well enough, or this would be great if you could do more of this content. We take all of that really seriously, and we take that on board, and we've been trying to sort of quietly prepare some new material in the background, which we're hoping to release later this year. As a part of that, Rob's been sort of preparing some new, what we're calling advanced material. And while Rob could talk about this now, I think what we'll do is come back to this later in the podcast, where he'll be able to sort of talk about this in more depth, rather than sort of just a passing comment now. Before we sort of move on, though, I think, Marcel, you've sort of led the initiative to make the training material available in different languages. So not necessarily the videos themselves, but the actual training hosted on the training.nextflow.io website. Would you like to sort of talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So it was very nice. Like, I'm from Brazil, so my native language is Portuguese. And I knew that we had this growing community, like in Brazil, and lots of people, they don't feel comfortable in English. They're not very fluent, so they would rather have something in Portuguese. So I translated the whole content to Portuguese. Not only to have it in Portuguese, but as a way to show that people who wanted to contribute, they could learn and do a contribution while they are doing that. They are learning Nextflow, they are reading the training material, and they do it for their language. And I was so happy to see this happening. So we had some people starting to translate to Spanish, then French, and it's a full community contribution, which is great. So we have now most of the training also in French, in a growing body of translation in Spanish. And soon we expect to have in different languages. So if you are learning Nextflow, if you are recently started to learn it and you master it a bit, and you feel like you'd like to read again the training material and do your version of the translation in a language you master, you're more than welcome. It's a great way to start contributing to the community.
On that topic, Marcel, you've also been working, or just recently you've done a university course. Would you like to tell us about that as well?
Yeah, that experience was very nice. So basically what we did was to look for partnerships with universities and research centers so that we could help them in a course that students would get credits just like any other course in a graduate program, but that we would help them to teach Nextflow as part of the class, and in the end they would get a secure certification that the students are acknowledged to know Nextflow, how to use it on the cloud, and so on. So we had this the first cohort that we did this project was with the Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte in Brazil. So we had master and PhD students and even some postdocs that were attending the course and getting trained with Nextflow. In the end, they presented some projects which were extremely nice. So soon you're going to have a blog post talking about this experience with all the examples of the projects that they had developed. And for me, it was a great experience. I was teaching the course. It was a great experience for me. Very nice to see how they developed during the course, what they did in the end, even in different fields, not only bioinformatics, and they got the certification. So if you are a professor or a PI or something, and you think it could be beneficial to your institution and to your students to have this partnership with Sequeira, feel free to reach out to us, and we can work something out so that we can help you give this class and at the end certify your students.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's really exciting and something I'm really looking forward to in the future is hopefully being able to help out some universities or other research institutes with sort of developing training and introducing it to different courses that they're a part of as well. So taking a wee sidestep, I think this might be a nice place to introduce Rob again, where you're able to introduce the advanced training and potentially the history of where this came from.
The advanced training, I think, came from a sort of recognition that Nextflow is quite there's a sort of long tail of complexity to Nextflow, and it can be one of its great strengths is its flexibility, I think, and its adaptability. But with that, can optionally bring a great deal of complexity, and there's a lot of little features sort of built into Nextflow that I saw people either didn't know about, they were sort of missing an opportunity to use these little pieces of Nextflow, be they Nextflow features or Groovy features. And the introductory training is a great way to get started, to move from zero to writing a Nextflow pipeline. But then from writing your first pipeline to moving into a production pipeline is like a significant step. And while the advanced training, even in its current state, like the advanced training we're planning to deliver, will not get you all the way there, I think we're trying to work to fill in those pieces and make that journey a little bit smoother.
Yeah, I think one question that it's being asked a lot is like, is it really advanced? What's the concept of advanced, right? I mean, sometimes people look at the introductory training, it's like, oh, that's too advanced. And we clearly see the person came from a different background, which is totally expected, right? But we cannot have this training that is introduction to everyone, right? Maybe it's too basic for some people. So how you handle that? How advanced you would say it is? What would be the profile that you would say, okay, this for your profile, this is the one you should go if you want something more advanced? Or then maybe that's not too advanced for you. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a really tough problem because Nextflow's complexity sort of branches away quite quickly. Like whether you were interested in like how data is moved around or particular operators, or so and lots of people take a sort of heterogeneous path through that skill set, like that skill tree. And so some of the material that we'll deliver might seem very advanced and sort of totally alien to some people, but to some other people who have already seen that little particular feature will be very mundane. So it's a very difficult thing we found to sort of pitch it correctly. And the advanced training is a moniker that was sort of stuck, for lack of a better term. I'm certainly not saying it's the best term. But we're happy to hear from the community if they have suggestions on better names. I'd be happy to rename it. But it's just perhaps like next steps is a good title. But it's the next training. It's another training that will help you sort of become more full featured, like use Nextflow to its extent.
So what exactly is going to be included in this advanced or next steps training?
So it's a couple of things. Like a lot of I try to. I've seen a lot of people use Nextflow and not necessarily know a lot of Groovy, which is great. And Nextflow is designed in such a way that you don't need to know any Groovy to write Nextflow. But it's hard to avoid the fact that Nextflow is written in Groovy. And so Groovy, the language, has a whole host of extraordinarily useful features for like coal-faced bioinformaticians and computational biologists, or anyone doing computational experiments. There are lovely little language sugar syntax features that can come in handy. And so we spend a little bit of time covering those Groovy features that I think are useful for Nextflow. I think the basic training does a great job of introducing operators, and the documentation in particular does a great job of introducing each of the operators in turn. But then there's a sort of second level complexity of what are the common patterns about how those operators are used in practice? Are some of them helpful together? And in what sense and in what ways is it helpful to combine those operators? I think that's another sort of section of the advanced training until we get a better name that we spend time on. So yeah, it's a combination of sort of Groovy, some advanced configuration, some touching on infrastructure, some best practices, and some how to combine operators together. And then over time, I'm sure we'll add new modules and new pieces to that story, but that's where it sits at the moment.
That's really exciting. I think it's worth noting here as well that Rob really was the brains behind this sort of new set of training material. He went away and developed a lot of this stuff. So I think when this is sort of presented and it's available for everyone, I think a lot of the credit should go to Rob for the time and energy he's put into preparing this for everyone.
That's very generous, but I think like that I did so much of it is a strong encouragement that pull requests are very welcome.
So I guess sort of moving on from this a little bit to talk about support for community training events. So at least from the developer advocate side, and I'm sure from Rob's side as well, that we want to be very supportive of groups and of course institutes and stuff as well who want to run their own training. If you are interested in running your own training, either as a hub or a local event, do feel free to reach out to us. Particularly Marcel and I would love to hear from you. What you have in mind, if you want any help or support sort of coming up with the training material, some advice from us about how you might want to run that, or little things that we've sort of found from our experience running this training multiple times that you should do to make sure that the event runs smoothly. Of course, at the same time, we're very happy to help support develop your own training material. Marcel and I have both done that once or twice this year already. We've had people approach us and say, hey, look, we want to run this training. We've sort of attended and gone along and helped either run a session or a module as a part of that training as well. For us, education, the training, the teaching of Nextflow is really, really important and something we're really passionate about. Of course, with Rob as well and many others. It's really, we love Nextflow. We want to make sure as many people in the world can get their hands on Nextflow and learn how to use it and integrate it into their daily lives as possible. So please do reach out if you are interested in running an event. Like I said, we'd love to hear from you. So just to sort of round things off, I think Marcel was going to tell us a little bit about some content that we've had come out recently, particularly on the different blogs, either from Sakura or Nextflow.
Yeah, a few days ago, we had this blog post on the Sakura blog called Nextflow and Tower for Machine Learning, and I loved that blog post. And if you do anything with machine learning, I'm sure you will love it. So basically, the blog post was written by Ben Sherman, which worked at Sakura. It covers, examples of machine learning applications for life sciences and healthcare. So it includes a pipeline that Ben wrote himself, but also pipelines that are being used by big companies using Nextflow to work with images in any type of machine learning application you can think of. It talks about all the way you can use Nextflow for working with machine learning, and even the opposite. It mentions another blog post that uses machine learning in Nextflow, in Tower more specifically. So it's a great blog post, tells you some theory, some examples. The hyperopt, this pipeline that Ben wrote, uses multiple different techniques to create models. In the end, it evaluates these different models to see which has the best accuracy and so on. It's a very nice blog post. So if you have a friend who is working with machine learning, and for some crazy reason he thinks Nextflow is not the right tool for that, this is the blog post you should ask him to read, because it makes it very clear that even though Nextflow is like the star in bioinformatics, it can work in any type of data pipeline, right? And machine learning is no exception. It's a great blog post. I loved reading that. I really recommend you to read this. So we are also recently had the release of the new NF Core website. So it's much more beautiful now. But not only that, I mean, it's easier to access lots of different things. You can look at the sub workflows and modules, documentation. I mean, I really liked it. It's much better. I mean, it's even from the technical background, let's say, it's much better. It had been written long time ago by Phil in PHP and all these things. Now it's using like rockstar softwares and frameworks and all these things. So believe me, it's not only more beautiful, it's much better in the back. Very nice, very nice. So check and see the new things, what you like, what you don't like. If you find any mistake, open a PR. Just like anything we said here, we are welcoming contributions. We would love to have your contribution.
It's worth noting as well that there is a lot of training material that is also available on the NF Core site. So what we've been talking about so far as a part of this podcast is primarily how to learn Nextflow. Of course, NF Core has its own sort of set of tooling and ways of doing things, particularly for writing modules, sub workflows and pipelines in general. And I just wanted to highlight there is a lot of really great training material that is available as a part of the documentation on that website as well. Moving on to upcoming events. So as has already been announced, we have the Nextflow summits coming up. So from the 18th to the 20th of October, the Nextflow summit is being held in Barcelona. But also on the 28th to the 30th of November, there is going to be the Nextflow summit in Boston. Both of these events also include an NF Core hackathon prior to the event. So in Barcelona, there'll be a few days of hacking with NF Core before you might want to attend the summit. Similarly, in Boston, there will be a hackathon prior to the 1 day of summit, or 1.5 days of summit in Boston as well. For both of those events, the submission of abstracts is now open. So if you're thinking of attending and want to apply for a talk or a poster, please do get those in. We're seeing quite a few coming already, and there's some really exciting topics that have already been sort of proposed. So I'm already really looking forward to the event. I think it's going to be fantastic in both Barcelona and Boston. At the same time, we've recently announced the community training. So the training events that we have sort of talked about retrospectively, they're also coming up again, this time in September. So from the 6th to the 8th of September, we're going to have the foundational or fundamentals or basic, whatever you want to call it, training material for Nextflow and NF Core. At this stage, what we're thinking is it'll be sort of 2 days of Nextflow where we'll sort of introduce sort of those key ideas again. We have some people helping out on Slack to answer questions. And then on the final day, the 3rd day of the training, there'll be some content about NF Core and how you can use the NF Core tooling and the modules and sub workflows that are available as part of the NF Core community to quickly and easily build pipelines as well. Something that is frequently requested by the community. On the 27th and 28th of September, Rob will be presenting the advanced, for lack of a better word, training to the community as well. This will be the first time that this has been presented to the community, and I'm really looking forward to it. It will work in a similar way to the foundational or basics training, and that it will be presented and shared on YouTube with questions being answered or asked and answered on the Slack channel. Both of these you can register for free. If you go to the NF Core events page, you'll see that both of these are listed, and all you need to do is just fill in the form there, to be kept up to date with how you can access that material later this year. So with that brings us to the conclusion of today's podcast. I'd like to thank, again, Rob for joining us. It was really fantastic to get his sort of take on the training environment and sort of tell us what's going to be happening as a part of that advanced training in the near future. We will be back again in a couple of weeks. I can't remember who we're talking to, but we will have another guest. I think it'll be Marcel and I sort of talking about some of the latest and greatest things that are happening in the Nextflow world. So again, thank you for listening. If you have any feedback or any questions, please do reach out to us on Slack or in the channel's podcast channel on Slack. But again, thank you, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks,
Rob. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
See you in Barcelona or Boston.
Yeah. Bye-bye.